everyone can see my screen. We're going to start here soon. I know more people are filing in, but I'll just go ahead and get us started and get moving. My name's Emily. I'm calling in from Kenya right now. I am the co-founder of a for-profit sanitation company here in Kenya called Sanitation. And today, very clearly from the title, we're going to be talking about women and wash. And I'm so lucky to be joined by some incredible women from around the world with just amazing inspirational stories they're going to share with us. And we've been hearing a lot about women and wash this week. Track one through the past few days has had some incredible research, statistics, stories that have just been very inspiring. And I think we're all quite clear on the fact that it's been proven that there is an in-proportional disparity on the challenges around wash for women. And on top of all of that, women are by far less likely to be involved in the design, in the operations, in the decision-making around wash. And there's so many reasons why that are. There is stigmatisms, there are social norms, there are challenges such as education, sexual harassment, bearing children that really prevent women, or at least provide barriers to why women aren't in wash. And it's not just a problem in one place or another, it's around the world. And today we're going to hear from people who are both in informal sectors to formal, who are in public, who are in private, who are in traditional developed worlds or in developing, and across the world there's problems. Recently, the World Bank did a study where they analyzed utilities, wash, the water and sanitation utilities from around the world. And they found that there was 20%, 1 in 5 of the employees of utilities from around the world were women. That is less than 20% were women, which is a big problem. And more than that, out of all the utilities they surveyed, that it was actually 32% of the utilities had 0 women in either a technical or managerial role. And this is a huge problem. And we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges today. But we're going to first hear from Kavita, who's going to give us a story of really what she's seen of challenges on the ground. But then we are also going to break out into breakout sessions and hear from each of you, because I think all of us have seen a little bit of these challenges of women in wash. And then we don't just want to stay on the challenges. I think it's very easy to recognize the problem. What we're going to focus on today is what are the solutions? What's actually working around the world of actually improving the status and the equity of women in wash? And so we've got 8 incredible speakers today. And so you'll see them. Each of us will talk a little bit about what we're doing to improve women in wash. And so myself, you're going to hear from Kavita in just a second. We have Charlotte, who's in Kenya, Allison, who's coming from Australia, Sunitra, who's been working in Nepal, Ava, who's been working really in Kenya, but across with the Pan-African group. We will hear from Deepa, we will hear from Margaret. It is going to be a great, great lineup, and I'm excited about a chance to share with everyone. It will be fast, and we will have breakout groups, so everyone please be prepared to speak up. We want to hear from each of you. And beyond all that, we are going to be using Slido today. So if you've never used Slido, it's a great place to start, and this will help us just understand who's all on the call. So right now, grab another tab on your computer or pull out your phone and use this QRL code right here that you see on the screen, or just go to slido.com and enter hashtag women wash, just as you see here. And we're gonna have a few questions just so I understand in the room. So go ahead and do that now. It's open, it's launched. So please jump in on Slido and start answering this first question. And what we want to know is, where did the majority of you and your FSM work happen? And so come here, I'm using the standard STG breakdown of different groups of countries. So please go ahead Oh, nice. We've got lots of Africa coming in. We've got Central, Southern Asia. Keep them coming. That's great. We got people who mix all over the world. Love to see that. Keep them coming in. We'll see the answers live as they come in. So glad to have some Oceania. Need more representation there. Great. We've got 12. Let me give a few more minutes. Please, again, go ahead and pull up Slido because we are going to have a few questions here. So help me out. Great. I know we have a lot. We have 60 people on the call. So let's see where they're from. A lot of Central and Southern Asia, a lot of mix, which is good to see. People who work all over. Still no one from Northern or West Africa or Latin America. I know it's the middle of the night in Latin America, so that one's tough. Give it just a little bit more. Great. I think it is so important when we talk about these worldwide challenges like women in WASH that we get perspectives from around the world. And so I'm so glad to see this. I'm so glad to hear from all these different perspectives today. And so that's great. Thanks. And we'll keep these results going. I'm going to next question because I think we've got half of the people here, so 41% in Central and Southern Asia. Can you hear me, Kavita, or is my internet going?
Emily, you broke up in the middle, but you're okay now.
Okay, good. Problem when you're using your phone is when people try to call you, your internet drops, so apologies there. Great, I'm just glad that we have a good representation. Let's move on to the next question. It's also good for us to see who is here, who's joining us here as far as gender that you represent. And of course, I expect lots of female, but it would be great. So the more men that we can bring into this conversation, the better. So please just whatever you identify as, let's see that breakdown. So we've got 30 responses already with 84% female. So there are definitely a lot of women with us today, which I love. And this is definitely, your sweet spot. I think a challenge I want to give all of us is how do we bring more men into this discussion? But that's great. So thank you for the men who've joined us. We really, really appreciate that. So let's go into our third and last question for right now is when you consider how you work in WASH, what professional category do you put yourself in? And I think this is really helpful just to understand the hat that people wear as they address these questions is, are you coming from the public sector? Are you working with the government? Are you private sector? I myself am not answering this, but I'm private sector. Do we have any frontline workers on the call today? It's just what I love to hear. It looks like frontline work. There it goes. Great. Go ahead and keep filling those in. It's really, really helpful. Xavier, thanks for your comment. And maybe men don't manage Slido as well. It's quite possible. I know that these kind of little additions into PowerPoint are helpful to make it easy to engage with everyone, but they do add an extra level of technical complexity. And especially if you're battling bandwidth or problems, it can be an issue. This is great. So we have a lot of NGOs represented. So Karibu NGOs. We have got a lot of academics here, which is great. I'm glad to see some of the private sector. Curious in time what the other is, but we'll get to that in the breakout groups. We've got public sector represented with funders, which is great. We still don't have any frontline workers. I think this is something that we want to get better and better at, and we'll keep working on that. But this is great. I think you guys are getting Slido, and thanks for introducing yourself a little bit here. So we'll pause on the Slido for now. And where we're going to go is we're going to just spend, like I said, a little bit of time on challenges. And I had the privilege of introducing Kavita, who's going to talk a little bit of some of the challenges that she's seen in her work specifically and walk us through. So, Kavita, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hi, Emily, can you hear me?
I hear you great.
Yeah, all right. Hi, good morning or whatever time it is to everybody, whichever time zone you're in. So I'm going to be very quick about this and just summarize. So one of the things we found in our work, and it would be good to hear in the breakout session where the people echo, that while gender equality remains a challenge across all organizations and sectors, which Emily had highlighted earlier, we are particularly finding challenges as far as the informal sector goes, and also partly in the public sector. So I just want to take a few minutes to highlight what are the challenges that we found in our work. And I'll start with the informal sector. I think the first thing with the informal sector is that it's invisible. And when we started mapping across the full chain of sanitation, which is what we're working on a project in FSM, we've identified more than 20 types of professionals, men and women. So there's sanitation workers, there's desludging operators, there are FSTP plant operators, there are CTPT management groups. So there are lots of them, and I think it's very important to name them and recognize them. The challenges primarily they face, one is there is no job security per se, and this is particularly finding with the sanitation workers. So either many people are daily wage earners or are on contracts. And what we are finding is that many of the people, sanitation workers especially, were on the payroll of urban local bodies, but which is changing in parts of India, and I'm sure in other countries, from what I understand from other colleagues, and becoming more informal, more contractual. And we need more evidence on this, but the more informal the things are, the higher is the percentage of women in the workforce, and the formal ones goes to men. Second is generally lack of social protection. Again, I think this is something we are more familiar with. It's not a thing by any chance limited to either only to sanitation workers or broadly speaking, informal workers. It is also not something that only women face. I understand that, but there is again increasing evidence that women-headed households find it much more difficult to access social protection, and it's a huge problem. Coming specifically to work-related issues, we found that there is huge gender-based allocation of roles. So for example, in solid waste, you will find women will do the collection and report into a male supervisor, or we'll find that many of the desludging operators are male and women will report in. So, or on formations, for example, right? So this means that people do not have, women do not have access to better paying jobs. Now, the reason for this transition not happening could be a mix of cultural norms. It could be that they are not provided training. We've also found instances that even if women are provided training, because of lack of opportunities and hand-holding and mentoring, they're not able to transition into better paying jobs, into leadership positions. And the last point I want to make, and this is also coming from the discussion we've had in the breakout rooms in the last few days, is SHGs. And SHGs, self-help groups, are held out as a hope for women to get involved in across the chain. But I just want to caution, saying that self-help groups have been successful in some parts of the sanitation chain, but we really need to say whether they are going to be successful across the chain. That's on the informal sector. Very quickly on the public sector, there are many issues, but I want to highlight one specifically, and that is of the leadership issue. We are finding more and more, and I think the conversation on the role of FSM actors over the last 2 days, what is made clear is public sector is critical. Of course, you need the private sector, but you're not going to have sanitation as a public service without the public sector. And what we are finding is that there aren't enough women in leadership positions there. Now, that could, again, many reasons. The pool itself is small. Many women drop out because of work-life balance issues. Those who stay on do not get adequate mentoring, do not get adequate mentoring support, opportunities, etc. And I think that's a huge challenge if we really, really want to change the gender equality thing in the public sector. I want to add by one last thing, and the reason I'm speaking anecdotally about these things is I think there is very little data on this. So Emily quoted a study, I think it's a World Bank study on utilities, but apart from a few studies here and there, We do not have the data. We do not have data on women in leadership positions. We do not have data on breakup of informal, formal sectors. And I really think we need better data before we actually try to, move things forward. So yeah, that's Emily. I hope I was on time, and that's it from my side.
Kavita, that's perfect. I really appreciate that you can speak from both the informal sector, the public sector, and some of these problems. And I agree with you. The data is hard to find. It is really, really hard to find out there, which is great. And I think very similar, I think, to WASH in general, is that we know the impacts inherently, but they're hard to quantify, right? And WASH tends to be the same way. Sanitation constantly is hard to prove. And so to that end, what we're going to do is right now, we're going to break out into some breakout rooms and talk about problems that you've seen. And maybe everyone on this call doesn't have all the data. That's okay. We want this to be, like I said, it's more of an inherent, right? And you know the problems, whether or not you can quantify them. So we're going to break out in some groups right now. So you'll be divided. There'll be some of our speakers on each of the calls. And we want to hear from you in whatever country you're in or work in. Whatever way that you engage WASH, whether it's been your own personal stories or things that you've seen or things you've heard, we want to know is what are those challenges that you've experienced for gender disparities in WASH? And furthermore is what do you think are some of the biggest barriers to women being involved in WASH? We've talked about a few, but what are those challenges and what's causing some of those challenges? So we're going to take about 15 minutes right now to break out in our breakout groups and have a chat. So take 15 minutes, please, I encourage you, turn on your video, turn on your audio, engage. This is where we actually get to hear people's stories. So we're about to break out into groups. Genevieve, if you would please go ahead and do that. If you haven't done breakout groups on Zoom, you're going to get an invite to join. Click join and we'll have 15 minutes and then we'll come back to the room. So please go ahead and click that join button. I see people leaving. Go ahead. Thank you all. You're getting it. This is a very intelligent group of people. You're doing wonderful. Click join. Click those joins. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. I think people are getting there. All right, I'm going to join too. I'll talk to you guys in about 15 minutes.
Emily, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Thanks, guys. Someday I'll figure it out. I hope everyone had as great discussions as we had in our room. Let's take a few minutes just to kind of share. I think each breakout room had a number. And so let's first go to room number 1. I'm not sure who was in that room, but just a quick, what were some of the interesting stories that you heard? Great. Allison, why don't you go ahead and tell us?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, it bounced me out of the system, so I had to come back in. Yeah, we had a great discussion. One of the things we talked about was sort of looking internally within your own organization, and sometimes that's not very pretty. We often but it's really important to look in to look at. We looked at a number of sort of the different kinds of barriers, sort of cultural skills, and sometimes the environments aren't so friendly, or there's little hints that we don't really sort of belong in those kind of spaces. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I thought that was there was some great examples I think many of us could actually relate to as part of that. And then some of those cultural things, and in terms of, say, that a woman might actually feel when she's had a family that her priorities may change, but don't just necessarily assume that. It's important to ask those questions and find ways around it. They may not want to travel so far, or they may not want to do certain things, but they might. So just not making those assumptions. Anybody else have a key point to jump in? Then go for it. But was it great?
That was great. Thanks, Allison. I was in room number 2 with Deepa. So Deepa, if you have anything to add too, but some of the things that we talked about is someone mentioned that they were doing training for manual pit emptying, and it started as half women, half men. And then the next day it dropped. All the women didn't come back. And when they went to find out, it was because the women were okay with it, but the husbands at home kind of put their foot down and said, no wife of mine's going to do this. Some people were talking about how a lot of NGOs are doing things around gender equity, but unless it's actually established in the national policy, then it's not going to be sustainable. And so how can we really think about that? Stefan even mentioned that engineering is still so many more men than women. I myself went to a school that was 93% men in mechanical engineering. And until we can train up more women and have them more acceptable, then it's going to be difficult. And then Deepa actually mentioned that, as Katya says, there was a lack of data, but she says there's a new video that's been created all about women and both qualitative and quantitative of their involvement in WASH. And so she'll send out that link, and I think that will be amazing to see, Deepa, so thanks. In room number 3 was Sunita. Can you give us a quick summary, Sunita?
Hi, thanks, Emily. We were a group of about 10 from colleagues from India, SEPT, Indian Institute of Human Settlement, colleagues from Bangladesh and Liberia. 2 men joined us, actually, Matthew from Liberia and Chris from Singapore. And the rest of us were all women. And we had some very interesting discussions. The one thing that came up very promptly at the very beginning of the discussion was that, it's a very male-dominated sector, and that was an underlying problem. And only recently do we see changes of this dominance pattern. And because it's a male-dominated sector, therefore, a woman's expressions and voice remain mostly unheard. Chris, however, from Singapore, who was the only male member in his team, said that, most of the project engineers in his company are women, and he felt that women are so much more meticulous. We are thankful to you, Chris, for this observation. You've just made our day. Our colleague from the Indian Institute of Human Settlement noted that, in the informal sector, women are more concerned about livelihood and social security, and therefore, equality and leadership become a second priority, and it's not really at the forefront. And unless you have the mind space and you have the social security to be able to think about leadership and equality, not much is going to change. And that the public sector also needs to prioritize women's leadership. Our friend from Bangladesh noted that, in the municipality offices, you don't see much women, but when you go down to the worker level, so to say, you do see a lot more women there. Matthew from Liberia had some very interesting experiences, and I hope we have time later in the day to discuss them about, how there are not many women in WASH, but then they're working with, women entrepreneurs to see that, more women come to the front and are capacitated. That's a summary of my group. Emily,
Thanks, Sunita. So next in room 4 was Katya. Katya, can you go ahead and give us a quick summary?
Yeah, hi. For our room, Sandhya is going to report. Sandhya, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. Just a quick briefing of what we really discussed. It was an interesting discussion. But before I come out with the points that our colleagues made, one request was that we need more male panelists going forward in these kind of discussions. Because as I see, even other groups had just maybe 1 or 2 men on the panel, on the discussion group. So I think we need more men coming out and discussing these issues. It just suddenly becomes very woman-centric when we speak of gender inclusion, and that's really not a great thing. So quickly to cover up the key issues that came up from our discussion is some things like, employment on contract basis, which sort of deters people from coming forward and participating in the workforce. We all agree that, there's a low participation of women in this sector, especially, while it might be quite disintegrated across various kinds of services, whether it is in terms of design and consulting, whether it's in terms of planning, implementation on ground, operations. So you see a different, a lot of variations, but generally workforce on ground, when you observe that. Hello? Am I audible?
Go ahead, keep going, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I thought I heard someone saying something. One important aspect that came ahead was the concept of safety at workplace, which we have been actually, this discussion is repeating in a couple of the sessions that we have been attending. And that's a huge gap. If addressed, I think we can see a lot more women participating in this sector, because women have broken many glass ceilings in other segments, like as Satish was mentioning, in media, we usually assume that journalists would usually be men, but now you see a lot of women journalists also working on ground. Next was in terms of reflecting the political landscape, which is what also sort of translate into the number of women working in the sector. We feel that if there is more of political leadership in the form of women who would stand for the cause of women, you'll see many more women coming up and working in the sector. One more thing, which I would not repeat too much in detail, was about engineering being considered a male dominant segment and seeing fewer engineers. And many of us have faced that, that issue being engineers ourselves. But yes, today you do see a lot of women participating in the engineering segment. Of course, there was one point that said that there are opportunities when you put out job profiles. For engineers, you see more men coming ahead and participating and showing interest. So maybe that's something that could be called an issue. We also saw the opportunities laid out in front of us, and we feel that many organizations are consciously taking up this this issue of gender equality through their recruitment in the first place. So that is a positive step ahead. There are a lot of capacity building initiatives happening, a lot of gender sensitization workshops happening across board. And this we feel is very important, because this could be an issue which is been accepted, acknowledged for years, but people haven't been talking out. But now we see more women and also some men, which I hope the numbers increase going forward. Even men are coming forward and acknowledging and talking about this. Sensitizing the male force on gender inclusion, we felt was a critical thing and a good opportunity that we see today. And I guess that's about it. But one more thing we saw is that reservation of, I mean, I raised that point at the end, maybe we couldn't discuss too much in detail in terms of having reservation set for women in a way of motivating them. Maybe that could be one way of getting more women to come forward and participate in the segment. So Kavita and Chris and others, if you feel I've missed out anything, please do add up. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that detailed report. I'm going to quickly, for time, jump to the next room. Eva, you were in room 4. Can you give us a summary? Room 5, sorry.
Yes, I was in room 5. I did the most of the talking. Probably somebody else should report. I spoke the most, so I don't know if anyone who was in room 5, they could probably summarize on what it is we were discussing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this is Dr. Shraddha from Vishwakarma University. So we were in team 5. We were started with, I guess, a little late. I guess 8 members were there, and I do not know, maybe because of network, we left with 6. So, but the discussion was like about the challenges which we are facing in India and the Kenya basically, and the students are also watching. So they have asked the questions to Eva because she is in frontline basically. So what are the challenges which are being, for a working women, as how to balance the life as well as home and this particular sector, which is very much not limelight and very much not accepted comfortability or comfortably basically. So that was one of the issues which I think Eva has very well answered. Because of the positive thoughts and firmness, we can definitely go ahead. And the other challenges which I mentioned is about the perception, like how we need to change the perception of people for acceptance of women basically, and how the household people or the family members are going to allow the women to work in this sector, especially in a very free mode. And along with that, in industries also, so that industries do not feel that the women are not capable of working on fields, basically, especially in this type of frontline job when we are dealing with fecal sludge management and other aspects. So that is the one thing. And the third thing which would like to focus is on the education sector, where we have to highlight in terms of the growing opportunities for women candidates. So a lot of sensitization is required as per the challenges are covered, so that more women candidates can come into picture and they have that strength, they courage, and to fight and to conclude that this sector is very important for all, and without this and without each and everyone's contribution, that could not be taken ahead, means SDG 6 could not be completed its goal, basically. So that was an overall glimpse of what we did in team 5. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very, very good to hear. So let's jump to the last room. Margaret, I think you were moderator there. If you or someone from your group can speak up. Oh no, Charlotte, excuse me. Charlotte. Read that wrong. Go ahead, Charlotte.
And give a summary. Yeah. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Charlotte, and thanks, Emily. We were in room 6, and we started off most of the points are already been covered by the other breakout room discussion sharing session, but our room was quite encouraging and seeing the positive side of the story so far. We started off with reflecting on the FSM journey itself. Like this year, we find so much of women participation, women taking moderator roles and then leading the session, keynote speakers. So FSM itself is a good example of how we are moving forward in this direction. Secondly, I was sharing about my own interaction in my team, and which Chris from other room has already indicated. Yes, we are 5 team members and 4 of us are women, and Chris supports us very well. And we see the women in WASH here in Singapore, even in leadership positions everywhere. So that's also an encouraging situation. Then Arvind and Pawan from India reflected on some of the sharing from India, and that's like we see a lot of women coming into the leadership roles through political push as well as through efforts of task forces. So these task forces could be one way where in other countries where we are still struggling to push, we encourage women in WASH sector could be through this, joint efforts. And also Pawan, I think Pawan highlighted on the issue, like why is women doing well in India now or coming up? What is the major issue or support they are getting? And then he was highlighting that this could be that they are speaking more and the voices are also heard. And then at political agenda itself, they are making policies and also rules to bring women into WASH at certain percentages, or say putting down their foot that yes, this much participation or these leadership roles should go to women. So these are the efforts where women can be brought or encouraged more to be able to be there leading in WASH, all stages of the WASH sector. And Sarah from Kenya said that it's encouraging, but we have a lot more to do, and especially like the engineering part and the technical roles. And we can see it from the PPE available from men versus women in PPE stores. So these were some points which highlighted that yes, we are doing good, but we have a long way to go. And academia and encouraging younger generation through these successful stories and sharing through such conferences and more programs would be another way to go forward. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else thinks that I missed any point, then please.
I appreciate everyone's discussion, and I'm always amazed that all the different perspectives that people have seen this. And so where we're going to go now is we've been talking a lot about the challenges, but constantly when I ask people, okay, what can you do to fix it? They're not sure of that next step. And so that's what we're going to focus about for the rest of today. Is we are going to speedily jump from around the world and hear what's working, what can we do? And at the end, we're going to challenge each of you of what is something you can do in the next week to promote gender equality in WASH. So hang on, we're going to move fast. And we're going to start first with an organization here in Africa that's working. So Charlotte, go ahead and take us away and tell us about your network.
Thank you so much, Emily. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for your points and what we have discussed. I find them so useful, and it's a very good platform to jump in and say what we are trying to do with the African Women Sanitation Professionals Network. So who are we? We are African women taking leadership to enhance our participation in the sanitation space. So that is pretty much what we hope to do, that we can identify sanitation, women in sanitation, especially because there's a lot of women in water, but also sanitation will really put them into the forefront and also tap on the issue of water. So we really acknowledge that there are women who are doing so much in sanitation, and there's space for them in leadership in something they can do. And the goal is to increase the number, equip and advance prominence in women, especially in the sanitation sector, and having them assume strategic roles. So for whatever sector area that we feel women can play a role, especially in sanitation, we really want to elevate that and equip them that they may be able to sit in sessions and even in platforms that will put our voice out there. Then where are we in the activities of the forum? We just want to formalize continent level registration. And this is majorly anchoring it in AMCAO and AFWA, because those are our major organizations that are really doing well in water. And we want to also anchor sanitation so that we are able to tap in the structures and in the networks that have already been created. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but also have a say in sitting in a platform where if they want someone to give us ideas on what is happening with women, especially in sanitation, then they can use the network to anchor the activities. So we are also supporting the Zambia chapter, which has been very critical, has already set itself up, and they've already started activities of linking the women, getting to know which are the organizations that need support, especially in sanitation, and be able to tap into that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so far what has been working, and we feel that is something that will continue tapping, is the platform that we are creating will help women working in sanitation. So anyone who is working in sanitation and is interested in just having a voice, having a platform where they can get information, real hand, first hand, of what is happening in AMCAO, in AFWA, in even areas that are very good in policy and making tech decisions, then we are able to have women get that platform. And then also changing the narrative on women in sanitation. We've heard a lot about women feeling that it's not something they've done before, it's not something they would want to do. Their spouses, for example, are embarrassed if they move into this space. So we just want the women to feel comfortable enough to tap into it. And then also identifying and supporting women sanitation entrepreneurs. So we have so many women who want to venture, but they don't know how they can get a sitting or a platform or even get the self-confidence to know that what they are doing is really making an impact. So that is what we really want to do. And also enhance visibility of the women in international, regional, and even spaces that are very influential, and spaces that where we can get a lot of feedback from women, because we really understand what is happening with us, be it MHM, be it sanitation, be it our children becoming sick, be it spaces that are just really good that we can be able to tap and move forward with. So we really appreciate the network. We are really looking forward to setting it up and opening it up to the whole continent, especially the African women, for them not to feel stigmatized and embarrassed, but be able to reach out and give the information they share and give the knowledge, given that they are really standing out. So that is what we are doing in the network. And we hope that we can have so many other people join in and help support in that. So thank you so much. Yeah, those are the contacts. If you ever need to reach out, yes.
Thanks, Charlotte. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a minute to talk about another women WASH network. And so we call ourselves the Women in Water and Sanitation Network, WWSN. And similar to African's Sanitation Professional Network is we are linking women who work in WASH from around the world. And our network was actually established at FSMA. And it really just came from a bunch of women in the sector who were feeling the difficulties of being a woman of WASH, of feeling the burden of both just the numbers and the fights. I was pulling up my notes here. And right now we have over 500 women from around the world who are joined via a LinkedIn group. And we have regular meetings. Right now, they've been virtual of growing these women connections. And so you'll see some of these pictures, you know, before COVID. This was at FSM5, at the the World Water Conference in Stockholm. And so there's been a lot of different, just kind of creating those linkages. And what are we about? So we're about establishing a global community for women, for networking and professional development. We really want to work towards a safe and gender sensitive work environment, and really about increasing the visibility of female professionals. And so how are we doing that? So one is just this global community of being able to learn from each other, whether that's, you know, networks offer passing of jobs, opportunities, of educational potential. So just creating that international network. And the next that we're doing is around mentorship. And so we're trying to set up older women who have got these skills, who have these experiences, to be linked with new women in the sector to be able to mentor them. The third is advocacy, of whether that's a conference and helping recommend more women speakers, whether that's in time, you know, helping to develop more national policies that are gender supportive and just being part of that advocacy. And the third thing that we're doing is just encouraging each other. And so right now, like I said, we have regular meetings. They are all virtual, and it's a chance to hear other perspectives, to talk with women. And so if you're interested in joining us, right now it is just women. I know there's been lots of talks about how men should be involved right now. So you can join us at wwn.org or our LinkedIn group. Just look at Women in Water and Sanitation Network. And we'd love to have you be part of this global community. And that's what we're doing. Let me pass it on over to Allison, who's going to talk a little bit about her experience. Go ahead, Allison.
Great, thanks, Emily. So I'm going to try and sort of navigate a couple of different worlds at the moment. My current role is as a fund manager of the Australian government-funded Water for Women fund, and as integrals to that whole fund is to look at successful approaches for safely managed sanitation, i.e. FSM, but also the important role that women and other marginalised groups can play and should play in sort of decision making and ensuring sort of effective service delivery. And we saw some examples of that on Tuesday night during that session, so people are welcome to go and have a look at that. But what I wanted to try and sort of bring in today, I wanted to make sure as we were putting this session together that we don't actually, and I know we don't forget, that there's still a lot of challenges within the developed world. And as part of my sort of fund manager role, I also work for an organization. So I thought I'd just sort of share some of the experiences of the company that I also work for, GHD, and just remind ourselves that these things are an ongoing journey within the so I'm going to sort of share some of my experiences. I'm a wastewater engineer, spent a long time in both Canada and Australia, but I want to sort of just bring out a few points of GHD's, the company that I currently work for, and the journey that they've been on, particularly over the last actually 7 years. It's been a longer journey, but just to set the scene for that, I joined GHD in 2003. At that time, most people were basically sort of secretarial support. There was very few sort of technical people, and that's not really very long ago. My first senior management meeting, I was one of 64. So I was the only sort of woman in the room. When I took my mat leave in 2007, they were just starting to actually pay maternity leave. I got 6 weeks paid maternity leave. Again, that's not so far back either. So that just kind of sets the scene. We're still dealing with all those issues today, and by no means are we there yet, but just some of the things that GHD started to put in place that might be useful examples for others. So 2014, the board sort of looked at where they were at. They weren't necessarily happy with where they were at in terms of gender parity, and we discussed some of those issues in our breakout group. So one of the things they did was they established a group called WING, sort of Women in GHD, and that provided a forum, one, networking, similar to what the other two examples we've heard, sort of within the organization, but it does also provide that forum to engage with men as part of that as well. And part of the commitment was also looking looking at how do we foster that safe working environment and shift the dialogue. I think one of the senior well, we can develop a policy, but a policy is only as good as how you put it into action. So it's much more about changing the conversation, changing the behavior, and creating action. So sort of jumping forward, sort of present is a very rapid forward. We have, as one of these little slides, in 1516, 5% of the men in the organization would take parental leave, and now it's over 40%. So that's just an example of that cultural change where a lot of the men in the organization really want to take that time with their families as well. And we now sort of produce an inclusion and diversity report that looks at gender and the issues associated with that, but that's been really central to actually expanding that out to look at cultural things, Indigenous, LGBTI. So it's developed beyond that, and I know there's some emerging things or research coming out now that's saying when you expand it out, sometimes you lose the gender piece. But I think one of the areas that GHD has been exploring is that intersectionality and the richness. If you actually look at women, culture, and you bring all those different things actually together. So some of the examples of what's been done is having some of those conversations at senior leader level, putting on a seminar on unconscious bias and having that sort of amongst staff. Water for Women, they've also seen that as a bit of an opportunity to share some of the things that we're learning in the countries where we're working, and how can we actually draw that forward. So our gender advisor and myself spoke to the GHD Global Diversity Council and sharing some of the experiences that we had. We've had a recent, one of our project managers help do some investigative work in MHH, and her project management group is now interested in actually hearing what she actually discovered as part of that research. So we have a bunch of engineers and project managers, largely, well, it'll be a mix of male and female, but those male groups actually being quite open to talking about menstrual hygiene in the workplace. I think that's a big step forward. So like I said, it's not, we've still got a journey to go, and as I was talking to people in preparing for this, that was very much emphasized to me. We know we are a part of a journey. We have the humility to understand that we still need to learn and grow, but they're reflecting on the things that have helped them to get to this point. Is that strong leadership, but also combined with the people and the community in which we're actually working, making sure you've got those policies, but much more importantly, creating those opportunities for dialogue. So that's just a few examples that I just wanted to share today. Happy to answer any questions, but as we said, it's really important to recognize that we all are on this journey of just looking at the chats. It's about framing the conversation so people don't actually feel defensive. We're all in this together, and how do we actually take that forward? So this is just one example, and I'm sure there's many from around the world, but it was one that I had experience with myself, and I'll stop there.
Thanks, Alison. It's great to also hear the perspective from a private and very formal kind of operations there. So thanks for sharing. We're going to jump now to Sinitra to hear a little bit about her story. So Sinitra, please go ahead. And guys, I'm loving the chat conversation. Keep it going on this side. It's great. Sinitra, to you.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for this opportunity. And I want to start out by saying, I'm from India, and from a country where most families want their children to become either doctors or engineers. I, however, was the black sheep of the family, and and I wanted to do something different. And at a very young age, all I wanted to do was to change lives and touch lives. I started working on WASH in 2008, and soon realized that the problems of WASH are as much or even more perhaps social than an engineering problem. And that's where I really found my calling, so to say. My work on WASH in India and with SNB in Cambodia and Nepal have made me realize that, that taking poo to the loo, so to say, is only but half the solution. And there remains a much larger social problem of sanitation, one that is absolutely riddled with stigmatization and discrimination against women. An example of this discrimination is the practice, of course, of manual scavenging in Asia, particularly, something you see in India and also in Nepal. And as SNB Nepal's work in urban sanitation across 4 provinces shows that, and we've just recently concluded a midterm survey, and that really shows us that, how little attention is accorded to occupational health and safety of such service providers, be it manual or mechanical service providers. When we come to India, of course, there are laws. There are laws that prohibit people from hiring manual scavengers to remove excreta, clean septic tanks, and sewers. But the practice, as all of us know, that still continues. And what most of us don't necessarily realize is that many manual scavengers are women. And the daily humiliation and the health hazards and the lifelong neglect that they're subjected to is absolutely excruciating. And the one thing when we talk about women as a generalized group of women is to realize that, there are subgroups of women, because when women are manual scavengers in India, they belong to a subsection of the Dalit group, the underprivileged group, and there lies a double problem, so to say. And there clearly, lack of an estimate in the number of women who are engaged in manual scavenging in India. And therefore, we have a limited understanding of the extent of their engagement in the practice and their related vulnerabilities. Of course, much has changed with mechanization. Many of these women have found other work in India now. However, the daunting challenges of the lack of a viable alternative source of income, the social discrimination, belonging to a Dalit group, the illiteracy and poor health, those linger, and they linger for generations, because manual scavenging is generational. A child of a manual scavenger for the social stigma and the lack of opportunities will again become a manual scavenger, or perhaps even a mechanical service provider, but remain in that profession broadly. Coming to the solutions. Now, India has a law that prohibits scavenging through the prohibition of manual scavengers and their Rehabilitation Act of 2013 and a few orders from the Supreme Court. However, there are state level institutions that have been set up, and the state counterparts and district authorities to implement these. And there are programs, of course, like self-employment schemes for rehabilitation of scavengers. But if you see the budget utilization, you see that it is much less than the allocation, which clearly implicates that there's an implementation gap, right? Now, there are, of course, other national level policy initiatives that have shown a commitment to this cause, and there's a proposed interministerial action plan. But women remain a blind spot in these schemes, because the focus of such schemes often is on the safety of sewers and septic tank cleaners. And the manual scavenging women tend to be scavengers who are cleaning the unsanitary dry pits. So what next? What can be changed? Now, we need a series of measures, to support persons engaged in manual scavenging with a specific conscious focus on women. At SNB, we started addressing the demand side of this in Cambodia with on-site solutions. We supported a pilot demonstration of fecal sludge management in Cambodia's first ODF district, Bantini, which also led to the country's first national FSM guidelines for rural households, which was endorsed by the Ministry of Rural Development in 2020 March. In Nepal, now in SNB is working on developing OHS guidelines for the 4 municipalities we work in, to embed these guidelines in the local government functions, to say in the ministries. And these guidelines, so now therefore they include implementation measures on training, awareness raising, budget allocation, looking at service providers, men and women, behavior change issues, developing of SOPs for service providers, and most importantly, longer term links to professionalization of the sector and improved service delivery chain as a responsibility of the municipality. And what enforcements would look like, whether it will be incentives, whether it will be fines, and working with women entrepreneurs to bring more and more women into the wash space, and not just in terms of service providers, but other products, MHM products or water filters, so to say. In India, then, first, the guidelines that exist, they need to be revised to include specific schemes, plans, targets, and budgets. Most importantly, budgets and indicators for all categories of work that come under the definition of manual scavenging. And this might be the only real way of ensuring that women engaged in manual scavenging of dry toilets are prioritized and covered by such schemes. Second, I think all the declarations and submissions that have been made in the past to claim that, that their area is free of manual scavenging, quite frankly, ought to be declared null and void. And a fresh identification of specific categories that have been left out needs to be mandated with specific instructions to include women currently or previously engaged in manual cleaning of toilets. And we need, a mandate of these administrations to set up perhaps camps to ensure the enrollment of all these women and their families under the government schemes to support manual scavengers, as well as other programs around health, education, nutrition, social welfare, employment, livelihood, and others. Sorry, I'm also getting a Teams message from my boss in SNV Nepal. What we also need, is of women currently or previously engaged in manual scavenging to ensure that they are part of the National Urban and Rural Mission livelihood. Inclusion in these schemes, usually recommend that the existing mandate, which ensures that at least 10% of the persons covered under SHGs and other initiatives are for the urban vulnerable. The enrollment of children of persons engaged in manual scavenging in schools, education institutions, skill building programs ought to be managed, because otherwise this vicious generational problem will continue. And this, what we need to do is to break this intergenerational cycle of inhuman work and oppression. Finally, we need special financial incentives to be provided to households with dry toilets, wherever they are present, to convert them to sanitary toilets. To conclude, I will say that I have seen, despite the problems and despite the vulnerabilities, I have seen women who have turned their lives and turned their burdens into a business. They've ventured into the business of mechanical cleaning of septic tanks by operating vacuum trucks. Some have gone a step further and own their own vacuum trucks, like Sita Gautam in Surkhet Municipality, Nepal, whose picture you're seeing now, who owns a vacuum truck and has been operating this truck herself since 2020. While their numbers are few, but I can only hope that their tribe will grow and pull more women out of their traditional inhuman occupation. Thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thanks, Anita, for some great insights from India. I appreciate that. We're going to move quickly, like I said, jumping to Kenya as we talk about emptiers. Eva, please tell us about women emptiers here in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Emily. Emptiers in Kenya. I think I started my business out of a challenge and out of lack of business, out of work. I could not get work. So there's this school in Kenya, one of these big schools, a boys' school in Kenya, and the toilets were really bad. The condition was pathetic. So it's at that opportunity that I was given a challenge to clean those toilets. And I didn't know how to do it, but it said how to start it. So I got a few gentlemen and I was the only lady. And I had to do the first one to show them that it is possible. So from it, we started the business, and I looked at other opportunities of other schools and cleaning. But while we were at it, we also started with the girls' school. So the girls' school, the biggest challenge was menstrual hygiene waste, sanitary pads. So with the sanitary pads, we had to go manual emptying, because for us to be able to get the pads out of the septic system, you have to do it manually. So it is when I was very concerned how the whole of this, what can we do around this sector? What can we do around this opportunity? And this challenge was bringing us money, okay, but who is going to do this job? How dignified is this job? So I chose, and I made it a purpose within my heart, that I will take it as a challenge and create that opportunity and get an opportunity out of it. And I will not I'll take the challenge personally, but not the attitude around it personally. So every opportunity that we get into this space, from the sanitary pad, there was the issue for the septic tanks filling. So we started doing emptying. And I want to thank Margaret, because I think Margaret is in this forum, Margaret Minor, who came and held my hand and said, Eva, I think what you're doing, the world needs to know. And that is why probably I am in this platform, because without Margaret, I don't even think this would be existing, because in the private sector, we do not know these discussions happen, but it is out of another woman that we were able to get that opportunity. So emptying business is an interesting business. It has different categories of emptying. And one of the things that I have determined, and I'm purposely doing it, and we've been speaking closely with Margaret about it, is to have data and also to classify, to do a mapping out. What is emptying? What sections do we have in emptying in the entire value chain? And who are we leaving behind? Because in this discussion, we are leaving a lot of people behind, especially like the private sector. I call myself private sector. I'm also in the frontline worker. And in most of these discussions, I've gone into forums and in conferences where people have spoken about private sector and they're not in private sector. We are sitting there and someone is just saying something totally practically, it cannot make sense, it cannot work. And I'm thinking, where is this person coming from? Why are they not asking us these questions to be able to ask them these questions? So as a woman, to frontline even in the issues of emptying is where you also find men. Practically, you can do the cleaning of a toilet, but probably you cannot drive the emptying truck, or probably you can even drive the emptying truck. But out of 100 men, we are about 10 women, or we are about 8 women. So what I have done is to take a challenge up and say, you know, this is us. We are women here. And when we are called for a meeting, we come very smart. Most people have a problem understanding that I'm from the emptying business, because they look at me and they think, no, she's not in the emptying business. And anytime that happens, I am happy, because I say, you've gotten our attention. We are trying to say that this job can be dignified. This job can be structured enough, up to the informal settlement. People, young women and men can own businesses in emptying and still look good, because that is what business is all about, looking good at the end after you finish doing your work. So the emptying business is a challenging business, but it's in the challenging that we get the opportunity. What has found so interesting about my path of career, which I have done a lot of Google research. I always tell people that I have a PhD in Google, because everything I have known is through Google. And I have the biggest challenge I've had is not even with men, it is with women. It is even in organizations where we sit in organizations for women, but we are still the minority. It's until they get to that question that they need you, is when now you come up to the front. And even sometimes a question that you know that is so obvious that they're struggling to answer, it's something that you do in your daily basis, you do in your daily workload, and you're doing it in every other day, but you find still you're not given an opportunity to express yourself. But I have said again that we have so many opportunities in these challenges that we have. We have our constitution, like in Kenya, where you in every format of a group, you have to have a representation of women. We also have groups even amongst women, where you have to have the private sector. The other groups, you also have to have a frontline worker coming along. So I've taken those opportunities and been able to showcase that emptying business is a good business. It has its own challenges. And even as women, we are not many, I can tell you that for sure. And yet we are still very many. It's only that we are not we've not been able to map out and say that this is a sanitation worker who is a woman and is in this category, is in this value chain category, and this is what she is doing. I know a lot of plumbers who are women. I know a lot of janitors who are women. I know a lot of engineers in the private sector who are women, but they're never in these forums. They're not in these forums. And anytime I tell them to come in this forum, the first thing they ask me, I know we don't want those attitudes, we don't want a negative vibe, you know, it's really, and then also we in business, our time is we have to negotiate making money and pleasing a client and having all these discussions. Probably it's a waste of time, but I've always try to emphasize and tell them, come, let's join this platform, because it's joining in this platform that we are able to get an opportunity to speak. Because of time, my final statement would be, and again, there's also different challenges like the FSM from the private sector, and you're a woman, you're a janitor. We saw that in the frontline workers, there were no such people. The registration fee how are they able to pay like a registration fee of 30,000, of that's about $300 US, and probably they have a lot of things that they can contribute, but how are they able to pay this? Who is going to take care of this? They feel like, okay, with the $300, I can improve my company, I can improve my work, I can buy this equipment. So instead of having a discussion of, I don't even know where it would end up. So probably what I would say, even to this forum, is that when we are dealing with frontline workers, when we are dealing with the private sector, they have their own special challenges, and especially for us women, because we have a lot of issues and we have a lot of things to balance out. It's for consideration when you're even having this planning of these meetings. Where is the private sector coming from? As a woman, where is she coming from? Is she able to afford this fee? And probably I could afford, but are my priorities set to that platform, or would that money be of more value than sitting it in the platform? Probably it would be, but I do not have that knowledge. So my parting shot would be, personally as Eva, I have decided to, any challenge that comes my way as a woman in this sanitation sector, I have decided to turn it into an opportunity, and also to mentor others to have the same understanding in any capacity that I could. Thank you.
That's amazing, Eva. And just a note for everyone, I think as we talk about things we're passionate about, we all speak more. So note, we will go a little bit longer than the allotted 90 minutes. I hope you guys can stay with us because there continues to be some great presentations.
Emily, I'm afraid we don't really hear anything.
You're not hearing it?
No.
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 That would be a problem with me. And sharing screen. And let's go again. Sorry, team. Thanks for speaking up.
And gender are complex. It also shows that while we understand and deal with sanitation as toilets, sanitation is essentially about dealing with waste, whether it be wastewater, solid waste, the fecal sludge that is generated from the numerous toilets that we are emphasizing should be built. And all of these have gendered implications at the household level. The lack of appropriate, adequate sanitation multiplies women's domestic care burden when there are environmental health implications of these. So it is no surprise that it is increasingly recognized that the sanitation sector can and should clean up gender inequality. So I build from this argument by saying that the very innovative and interesting work that is happening around expanding thinking around the sanitation economy requires a reflection on how do we integrate gender and inclusion into such technological innovations. So this work by the Toilet Board really shows how functional access to toilets is very much an impact of economies around the toilet use, economies around access, information, data, and also innovations around what happens and how we deal with the fecal sludge that is derived from these toilets. And this sort of diagrammatic overview of the sanitation economy sort of is a reminder, perhaps, that the relationship between the water as well as the sanitation sector and masculinity and technology and a reliance on technological and infrastructure fixes is something that definitely needs to be recognized if we are going to be talking about inclusive sanitation. So this sort of thinking drives home the point that addressing gender in sanitation is much more than just fitting in women into the technological design. It's really about fixing the system from a feminist perspective. So what does this mean? So yes, a feminist approach definitely supports the idea of scalar intervention. So yes to going beyond toilets, yes to FSM, but it's also about tackling structural systemic relations of inequality, especially by gender. So essentially, this means revisioning technological innovations on sanitation economy by understanding that when we talk about design, innovation, planning, management, governance, infrastructure, technology, we have to essentially understand and deal with the fact that the playing field is very uneven and the outcomes of sanitation interventions will have significant gendered outcomes. And just in case we thought that this link between sanitation and gender is very much a global south issue, that is certainly not the case. There's a very interesting article written in 2020 about how the lack of attention to gendered identities, to multiple plural gendered identities, and to who pays to make public sanitation safe, convenient, and appropriate have real implications at a societal level. And driving home the point that planning, design, technology will really benefit from a more feminist perspective, which is a more holistic approach to understanding difference, divide, inequalities. So if we take this example and translate it to the thinking or rethinking about gender in sanitation, it's about thinking about poor women, toilets, menstrual hygiene, health, safety, but also really rethinking about inclusive design and inclusive feminist leadership in sanitation planning and management. So this very interesting framework provided by Srilata Batliwala on feminist leadership provides some really interesting insights about these 4 pillars that can be looked at, about understanding how leadership, decision-making, and outcomes are about addressing power imbalances and moving the scale towards more shared, more uniform, more collective types of leadership and decision-making. Second point is that we need to question what values and what principles guide decisions and actions. We need to also understand that science, research for development solutions, including sanitation interventions, are rarely objective. So really questioning what political ideologies inform these interventions. What is the larger purpose? Is it about sustainable, viable economies only, or is it about inclusion written into the larger design of sustainable, viable economies? And to understand that what happens and what we do is not dissociated from all of the above, that practices converge with power, principle, and politics. So thinking about what might such an approach look like in action, I just want to give you a glimpse of our work, not on sanitation, but on agriculture in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. So the reality of the situation here was that poor and landless farmers, including large numbers of women, lacked the material resources as well as the relational resources to bargain and achieve productive agriculture. On their own, as individuals, this was not going to be possible, or it was going to be incredibly difficult. So the idea evolved, building from other examples of women's collectives that may be coming together as a collective is a way forward. But adopting a feminist approach meant not imposing our ideas about women-only groups. It was really about that the idea of a collective should be a self-evolving design and a decision. And hence we had multiple types of groups in this project intervention. And what was very interesting is that providing this flexibility and allowing for more intersectional inequalities to come into play really helped unpack and address gender inequalities. It was also about understanding that the issue is not about what we as researchers want, but really about what works at and for, you know, the end users. So, for example, accommodating for domestic care work, for allowing overburdened women, pregnant group members to be replaced by males, or to change their plans, or to drop out from these collectives was something that really needed to be built into the overall design. And also, finally, it was about facilitating choices that while we definitely wanted the group to function together and gain material benefits, what we found is that
I'm afraid we've lost sound at this end again.
Hi, Emily. So I'm here, so maybe I can just round off if there's still time.
Yeah, I think go deeper and finish off, or at least, sort of please close it off. Yeah, so it's not left hanging. I think Emily's frozen.
Yes, so I just wanted to really end by saying that, you know, when we looked at collectives and we looked at bringing together these principles of feminist principles that I discussed in the slide above together, it sort of really, you know, influenced us to think about collective leadership and really understanding that power for the most marginalized, including women, in very difficult patriarchal contexts was possible when you know, by the strength of their numbers, etc. But what we also realized is that this intervention that we had started on the ground, you know, the same approaches needed also to be sort of introduced and sort of experimented with in the institutional spaces. Otherwise, there's a disconnect between the innovation that's going on with communities, end users, poor women, and the institutional black box, where, you know, a lot of things are, as we've already discussed, not clearly understood and not clearly acted upon at the moment. So we're bringing these approaches, are learning from agriculture to really also influence our WASH work in Nepal, and also new work around fecal sludge management and the sanitation circular economy that we are doing in a couple of countries with other partners. Thanks so much.
My apologies, ladies. My computer completely crashed, so I'm on my phone now. But Deepa, thank you so much about bringing in the feminist approach. I think it's fantastic. We're going to jump now to Margaret. Margaret, if you can share your slides directly or just speak. You've already been called out as an incredible inspiration here in Kenya. So go ahead, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Emily. If I had the video, I would go to the last slide about the barriers that make women not to progress. But first, I'm Margaret Maina from Kenya. I'm managing director for one of the water utilities. And we are looking at the positive and what we can do now, because we have had all these issues. First, as a woman, due to our biological nature, we have that inequality in the first place. And also there are those societal inequalities.
I think we lost you, Margaret. We can't hear you.
Yeah. I think you should close your video. It's gonna help the signal.
Yeah.
Oh my. Allison, why don't you?
No, it's
what women can do.
Challenges of online discussions.
Margaret, can you try and turn your camera off?
We have to cross those barriers now. We have been talking so much about women, but
We might have lost her. Allison, why don't we go ahead and jump over to you, and then we'll see if we can get Margaret back in.
Okay, sure. So we were going to have a bit of a Q&A, but I think we're going to leave that unless there's any burning questions that somebody wants to actually put in the chat. But I think I'll just sort of, I'm not even going to try and summarize everything that we've just heard. This has been a real sort of rapid fire, rich set of stories, things that are working, things that people are exploring, collective leadership, networks, policy, dialogue, businesses, feminist approaches. There's a whole richness there. But what I'd really like you to actually think about over the next few minutes, since Emily's computer has died, we won't have a Slido. We were wanting to try and actually collect those via the Slido. But if people could have a real think, what's really struck you out of all these different presentations, something that you can actually take away, whether it's this week or this month, but what can you actually do to take this forward? It could be anything. It could be talking to a mentor. It could be there's been a fantastic chat along the side too, just making sure that as we have all of these discussions, we don't create an us and them kind of scenario. It is about this whole journey together. It's no one's fault per se, but how do we actually start to have some of those difficult conversations, or just some of those conversations that need to be had. So it might be going and talking to a male colleague that you've never spoken to before and explore what their perspective is. So have a bit of a think. We were going to collect on a Slido, as I said, but maybe what we could do as we go through, if people are happy to share what they would like to do, they could actually put it in the chat. But the idea is that you go away from here, you put some of this work into action. As we've said earlier, it's a journey, and we're all on this journey together. So what's the next step that we can all take to go on the next step of our journey? I don't know if Emily, you want to add anything, or whether you can actually send us the Slido. I know you can't link it off your phone, but if there's another way of doing
I think we'll just leave with
what's most important, yourself,
challenge.
and have that personal journey. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna have we got Margaret back? No. Okay. All right. Well, I might hand over to you, Emily, just to say a few closing remarks. But yeah, let's everybody rise to the challenge and see what we can do, and we can come back next year and share what we did and the impact that actually had.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Apologies for the technical difficulties here at the end. It is the reality of the world that we live in. But I have so enjoyed the chat conversation, these stories, and I hope each of you is inspired about there are things that we can do. And Allison listed some examples, and there's been great discussion today. So encourage you all to go out and don't leave it here. And let's overcome those barriers and start making a change. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to all of our lovely speakers. You are an inspiration. And to everyone who joined us, have a lovely, lovely day.